Welcome to the Lift Your Story podcast with guest Ryan Fahey, author and owner of Fahey Consulting. Hi, everyone. I am Lorianne. I am that gal from Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, and with...
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas. Welcome to our Lift Your Story podcast.
In this episode, we welcome Ryan Fahey. He is a husband, three-time author, and owner of Fahey Consulting. Thank you so much for being here.
And thank you, Roy and Lorianne, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. I've got to ask you a question. Is this your tagline? What lies in front of us and what lies behind us is but a fraction of what lies within us.
Well, that's a great question, Roy. It's one of my favorite quotes. I believe it's Ralph Waldo Emerson. And, you know, that quote really was probably some of the ethos of my second book, which is Your Best Decade, where I really talk about, you know, this notion of unlimited potential and how do we actually, you know, construct a life and really look at a decade of our lives to you know, kind of achieve this element of ourselves or this level of ourselves that we might not be able to achieve or may not have been able to achieve in the past. And so that quote just is one of many that kind of stands out. I have a few of them throughout the book and throughout my journal. But yeah, that one is a real nice kind of real nice tone to set the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I read that. I thought, wow, that's pretty. I like that. So I had never heard it. That's why I thought maybe it's like your tagline or something.
Oh, yeah. I think I put it in my email just to kind of lift people up. So I'm glad you read it. That's great.
Yeah. Well, hey, it was great. Now, your book, you know, about remote working, that's your latest book, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So was this brought on by the COVID lockdowns, everybody being stuck at home, or was this before?
Yeah, great question. So when I finished my second book, I knew I wanted to write a third one at some point. And so that one came out in 2020 in April, or sorry, 2019 in April. And then about a year later, obviously March 2020 hits and the whole world kind of hits the pause button. And myself included went fully remote. I had done like remote work in the past. I'd been doing remote contracting, but to go kind of fully remote and to take our full-time team fully remote and to see what everyone else was kind of going through who had to make those shifts to remote work, it just really got me thinking about, how do we restructure our home and restructure our routines so that we can be well. And then once I kind of established that, I got thinking about this book and I said, well, maybe I write the third book now. You know, like I'm not sitting in traffic anymore for hours a week. You know, we didn't have kids yet. And I just really felt inspired. I thought, you know, if there's a way to support other remote workers out there so that they can thrive and be well and flourish really in their remote work, I want to provide a tool and a resource to help support them with that. And that's really where the book came out of. It came out of a need, you know. And the other thing I'll say too, Roy, that was fascinating was, you know, all of the whole world was kind of shutting down, right? It was the NBA, then the NHL, and I mean, we all remember this timestamp. But I went on to Amazon and I went on and did a Google search of books that support remote workers, and they're like in terms of well-being, and there wasn't hardly any out there. There was a few, and so a big notable book by Jason Fried called Remote, but there wasn't much. And I thought, you know, remote workers, they need to not be forgotten in this conversation about well-being. And so I went ahead and wrote it, and that's kind of where the book was born, definitely out of that significant shift for sure.
You know, one of my sons at one time worked for AT&T and he worked at home, but he had to go in like once a week for, you know, just meetings and whatnot. And, you know, he loved working at home. You know, he liked to sit there in his shorts and flip flops, a t-shirt, because he was a computer programmer. So it was great for him. But, you know, he said after a while, he kind of missed the interaction, you know, with his coworkers and all that. So then they started bringing them in once a week just for that. I mean, they conducted business, but they found out from all the people worked at home that all of them said, we missed the interaction. So their boss said, all right, on Wednesday, we'll come in for meetings, and we'll come into the office on Wednesday. So, and that was really kind of leveled him out. He was still working home. He still had interaction, but he wasn't going every day to the office, fighting the traffic, and all that stuff.
Yeah, you raise a good point, and this is something I talk about a little bit in the book around, staying social, right? Like obviously we're humans, we can adapt, but being intentional about staying social. So for folks who choose to stay fully remote or have to stay fully remote, being intentional about figuring out how you're going to remain social, because we're human beings. We need that, right? We need that water cooler conversation. And I think we're going to see that as we continue to maybe get out of COVID, hopefully here in 2022, what are these hybrid schedules look like, where maybe you have teams come in a few days a week, but folks can also still change environments. I think that might be the preferred medium for a lot of folks. And for those that maybe they go abroad and they're living in Thailand, working remote, they're just going to have to get creative with these other ways of staying social, because you're right, it's a super important part of work and life.
Well, I know here in the States, there's a big push for a lot of these corporations to have all this office space everywhere. Now they're finding out, due to people working at home, they don't need all that real estate. And they're telling people, we're not coming back. You're going to be working at home from now on. We may like rent a meeting space for something, but basically you're going to be working at home, and we're getting rid of all this real estate. So I know, especially, we've got tons of people moving into Texas, but even with that, homes are selling like crazy. I mean, they're just ridiculous. But the real estate, I mean, there's office buildings or shopping centers. You go by them, and there's hardly anything in them. They're all up for sale, but there's nobody wants to buy them.
Yeah, it's like the great migration, right? It's like things are just swinging so fast that if I could write a 2.0 version of the book, because this has come up in a few other conversations as well. Like the book that I wrote really focuses on the worker. So how do you structure your life so that you can take care of yourself and flourish with your job, with your family, and in this new way of working for so many? But if there's a 2.0 version, I think I would write a version about, for the employer, right? So definitely there's cost savings advantages to not having that office space anymore. But where are you rolling that money into, right? Like, can it be rolled into staff wellness programs? Can it be molded into incentives around wellness, or devices to help support those remote workers' working well-being versus just putting it onto the bottom line? So I think there's a 2.0. It would be focused on yes, there's a need and a responsibility, I guess, for that worker to take some ownership of their well-being, but it should not solely be on the worker. It should also be, there should be some responsibility on the employer for sure.
What issues are you finding out that people working from home are challenges for them?
Yeah, one thing is super interesting is milestones. Like, think about this. Like, so say you have a birthday and, we're pre-COVID, you're in the office and there's a birthday. It's like everybody knows there's a birthday, there's a cake, you go and you blow out the candles, you celebrate, maybe it's 4:00 on a Friday, and then you end your workday, right? So that's kind of that socialization piece, but it's a milestone. And so one of the things I noticed right away that was happening, not only in my space, but in other spaces as well, is these milestones just get, there's an email gets passed around versus an actual time to stop and pause and celebrate those individual milestones with your team, or, with a specific squad or whatever group you're working with. And so I think that's going to be a continued important need as we move forward, right? Like, we're seeing weddings happening, children are being born. We've been in this thing so long now, and people are so distant. It's like we have to be very intentional about taking a moment and really not missing these milestones and acknowledging milestones with other people, right? Like, say, your podcast here gets 1 million views tomorrow, that's a huge celebration, right? And it's not to be diminished just through this digital space, right? This digital means of communicating. I think that's an important need moving forward. Another thing that I think is a real challenge, and Lorianne, you might be familiar with this because you're in Ontario as well, but there's this whole push to this right to disconnect for remote workers. There's actually a bill just passed here in Ontario for businesses greater than 25 employees that they're mandated, I think, after 7 p.m. and before 7 a.m. to not be sending emails to their staff. And other countries have done this. Portugal has done it. I think France was the first to do it. And I think it's really nice because it provides this opportunity for remote staff, particularly those middle and kind of lower level maybe staff, to have the opportunity to disconnect and fully psychologically disconnect. Because even here in our home, my home office doubles as my business office, doubles as sometimes the kitchen table, doubles as, sometimes the hangout spot. But you need these psychological boundaries. And I talk about this in the book. And, one of the simplest psychological boundaries you can create if you're working remotely is just closing the computer. So just simply closing the computer can be a signal to yourself that you're done for the day. You're turning off for the day. And I think that we need to have those boundaries. And again, back to the employer-employee idea, it needs to be both, right? There's the employee that can step away, but also the employer to encourage a culture of disconnecting, to take care of yourself, to get outside and go for a walk. So I think those are two big needs that I've seen, and there's probably more, but for the sake of time, I guess we'll park it there.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. We had a guest on, it was a parenting coach. And we're talking about disconnect, like we'll use cell phones, for example. You tell your kids, hey, get off your phone, and her deal was, well, if the kids have to get off their phone, you got to get off yours. If they've got to get off the computer, you got to get off yours. So, what you're saying about workers is pretty much the exact same thing she was saying about parents and their kids. They've got to disconnect.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the times I think is kind of a limbo time for a lot of people, whether you're a parent or a non-parent, is the evening, right? Like just before bedtime, it's so easy to grab your phone, to check Twitter or check your email or whatever. And, it's important to guard that and I talk about this in the book about a healthy sleep routine and, making sure that the bedroom is cool, making sure that, your bed is made. That's an important piece. That you separate from devices 30 to 60 minutes before you even go to bed, because our brains need to come down from all of the information, everything that's coming at us. So, that's a key area. And, with kids, I'm sure it's exactly the same. I don't have kids, but I'm sure, if we did, we would have these hard conversations about, being able to disconnect. And there's actually, what's her name? Ariana Huffington, I think is her name. She runs the Thrive Journal. And she's a big proponent of phone beds. So there's actually these devices where you can put your phone in a bed, and it's a way to teach your family, like you go to bed, your phone goes to bed, or whatever, and the devices are in a bed in the next room, so they're not even in the bedroom with you, which I think is huge.
Lorianne, did you want to speak about making up the bed?
Making up the bed?
Yeah.
That I do that every morning.
Yeah, that's one of your things.
Yeah, and in fact, we had a book that was a bunch of contributors, One Habit of Successful Entrepreneurs. And my contribution was that, like, what is the one habit? I can't move forward until my bed is done. In fact, it gets done before I walk the dog. So yeah, first thing I do.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I thought I did see something about that book. I need to check that out because I was curious what that one habit was. So it sounds like it's making the bed, which absolutely super fundamental. Well done.
Yeah, that's one of Lorianne's things she has to do.
Absolutely.
But yeah, but I mean, you're not the only one. I mean, there's an admiral that's tells his in the talk that the most important thing you can do every day is make up your bed to get your day started right, so yeah.
Believe it or not, I tried one day not to, just for fun, to see how, and I had really bad anxiety. I can't do that. There's a messiness in my head if my bed's not made, which is really strange that they're connected, but they are. Yeah.
Yeah, another thing that I've noticed as well, similar to what we're talking about is, so in the book, I talk about the psychological send-off routine, which is your kind of the evening routine before you go to bed. And without getting political, one of my favorite quotes from Obama is a president's day starts before the president. And he was known for kind of closing the work of the day down by, 6 or 7 as often as he could. And then actually pulling out the next day's itinerary and going through kind of everything that needed to be done the next day, so that when he went to bed, he kind of knew, these are what I know is going to happen. Obviously, there's surprises, but I think that's a very interesting thing. And I think it depends on the type of work you do, maybe, but we just live in a time of a lot of disruption and a lot of innovation is happening and things are changing so fast. So I think having this psychological send off in the evening to kind of frame what's the next day going to look like, how am I going to spend my time, what are my most high priority items with my job and obviously with my family first thing, and how can I manage that so that you kind of, not that a fire is not going to pop up, but if it does, it's less overwhelming potentially because you've psychologically prepared yourself for what's to come. So I think that's another important piece as well.
Now, when I was working, I used to always at the end of the day make a list of what I had to do the next day. And I'd think, okay, I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. This I got to get this done first. Well, of course, one phone call would throw that list out the window.
Yeah.
My job was always reactionary most of the time. So, but I was kind of like a list guy. I need to check this off, so make sure I got stuff done. But for me, that's what was effective for me.
Mm-hmm.
And even I still do that. My phone, I've got everything on there. Call so and so, go here, go there, get this, do that. So I do it on my phone now instead of writing down on paper. But yeah, it's important for me. I get more done that way than if I don't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like there's a saying, I'm probably not going to get it right, but it's like what gets scheduled gets done, right? Or something to that effect. And it's really true. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm still a paper person. I do have this stuff on my phone for Google, so it blinks at me to remind me, because sometimes if you get busy, you forget the time. But I need my paper schedule.
Yeah. Let's say if you want to get something done, find a busy person if you want to get it done.
Yeah, that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was another tough thing too, though, because I remember, I did a lot of volunteering at one time, and that was something that through this pandemic too, which was also something that helped out, an extracurricular to work. And I did join the Milton Chamber of Commerce when I was living there. It was so different, right? Because everything you're doing is this way on Zoom, and it's just not the same, because that was part of that interacting that just got taken away, which I think does help the mental health too. Even if you are remote, you could also at least do the volunteering, but that was even taken away as well.
Yeah, you touched on a really good point, and I guess this is a bit of a spoiler, but I'm going to write another book, and one of the things, the focal point of the book is going to be, this digital age that we're in. Like, if remote work isn't really an industry anymore. It's kind of everywhere. It's like it's education, it's health, it's in every sector, and if we're going to continue to do this integration of remote work. And now you have students that are learning remote, and what's that going to do to the job force? That's a whole other conversation. I'm thinking about this next book, something related to this digital world. So I may be calling on you, Lorianne, to share some thoughts on that, because it's I think it's going to be huge as we continue forward, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I often wonder. I know my grandkids, 2 of them were struggling doing the homeschooling. The other 2 did fine, but they all wanted to go back to school. And you think kids love being at home, but they didn't really. And I'd say a couple of one of them really kind of suffered on the homeschooling. So.
Yeah, and then there's a lot there. And another thing that I've noticed too, and this is more for maybe northern climate or schools in northern climates, is I've seen schools also trying to, well, there's shifting policies to take away snow days, right? So instead of having a snow day, you just go home and you learn remote. And I think that, there's a whole kind of catching up idea that philosophy comes from, and or that decision comes from. And there could be some good with that, but I also think about my days growing up and, getting a snow day, going outside and building a snowman and playing snow football and walking down the street to find the neighbor. And I think there's a lot of good there. So yeah, I feel like when we talk about disruption, I think we could spend hours talking about the education system and like just the murkiness of disruption for sure.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned disruption. I mean, really, that's what everything is going to now. Everything's being disrupted. I mean, it's affecting everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that the organization I work with, we were talking about this not long ago, is, I mean, it's a 90-year-old organization, or over 90 years. And we really just turned into a startup. Like we just had no choice but to just break down the walls of strategic planning and figure out, how are we going to adapt here? Because the things that were normal yesterday are no longer going to be of need to schools or need to the community that we serve. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that. Even with my business, one of the things that I've started doing is just quarterly goal setting. And, in the past I would do year goals. And I just came to realize that I can't really control what's going to happen. Like policies are changing all the time. Governments are changing their minds nonstop. And so it's like, okay, well, what can I control? So if I can control these things and I set these micro goals over each quarter, I look back on the year, I see all these successes, but really you're putting together 4 specific plans. And so I just find personally that works better for me, because I kind of know exactly where I'm at in that quarter versus, this year of just ever changing decisions around me. So for anyone out there that has a small business, I totally recommend quarterly goal planning. It's huge.
Yeah, we interviewed a lady that was doing time management stuff, and she said, if you're doing stuff for this quarter, you're already behind. She said, you need to be in the fourth quarter, having the first quarter already planned. And when you're in the first quarter, you need to get the second quarter planned. She was big on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I can't even fathom, like, if you own multiple businesses, what that looks like. Like I just have one. So for folks that have multiple, that have made it through, I think there's a lot of resilience there, a lot of kudos to those people for sure.
That was another thing we were talking about. I was chatting with a friend. I said, we used to do business plans for setting, but this is something that was not, anybody who bought a company, let's say like even 6 months or 3 months before COVID. I mean, this was completely something that people weren't aware of. You have financial crashes, but those you can, sometimes they're anticipated. Sometimes you can see it if you're really good at paying attention to it. But this one, I don't think was anywhere. So business plans, how do you do that with putting in, this, I don't know, part of it that you say, okay, but this might happen. It's like, who's going to put the pandemic may happen during the next year? Like, what I'm saying is that I find business plans are so difficult. Quarterly is so hard to do. So yeah, it's nice to have a plan, but you've also got to recognize that plan can change on a dime. Yeah.
You can't account for everything.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have a funny story on this if we have time for it.
Sure.
So right around when everything was kind of happening, this was late January 2020. I was actually at an event with Dr. Theresa Tam's team. So for listeners in Canada, they may know Dr. Theresa Tam is the Chief Public Health Officer here. And my wife and I were at the time, we were trying to book our honeymoon. So I was at this conference in Toronto and go into the conference room and Dr. Tam's not there. And at the time, we were discovering what was happening, and it was more of an international, but kind of overseas type thing at that point. And COVID wasn't really in Canada or the United States at that point. But anyway, long story short is I was booking this honeymoon. We had a break. I went up to the hotel room and I was booking our honeymoon to Bali. And I remember just thinking, like, maybe I should get insurance on this. Like Dr. Tam's not here. This is a pretty important event. If she's not here, there's probably some concerns. I'm just going to pay the extra money, get the insurance. I'm so glad I did. But yeah, to your point, it's like nobody expected this, and it was just like, here we are, right?
Yeah.
This is
Ryan?
plan start from one.
Do what?
So the business plan starts from page one again.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah. Ryan, how can our listeners reach out to you?
Yeah, great question, Roy. Twitter's the best. I love Twitter. So they can reach me there at WellnessRF. Facebook as well. You can just type in Ryan Foy, and I have a Facebook page. Also on Instagram, you can just type in at WellnessRF there, and you can connect me on Instagram. Yeah, and I'm always happy to reach out and connect. And if anybody wants to talk more about my books or anything like that, I'm happy to carry the conversation.
Where can they get your books?
So primarily Amazon, like probably most of the authors you bring on. I'm a self-published author, and so Amazon, anywhere in the world, I think you can get it wherever Amazon ships to. And then of course Apple, you can get on Apple iBooks. And then I believe you can also, if you're in Canada or in the United States, you can get it at Barnes and Noble or Indigo in Canada as well. So lots of different options.
Great. Perfect.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here, sharing that with us.
Yes. Thank you so much for being our guest.
Well, thanks for having me. And for all the listeners out there, keep rocking it. Keep up the good work. Keep listening to great podcasts with Lorianne and Roy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Okay.